Apologies have been received from Senators Ivana Bacik and Billy Lawless. Today we meet with Minister of State at the Department of Taoiseach and with responsibility and Department of Defence Deputy Paul Crowe. You're very welcome, Minister. The committee agreed as part of its work programme for 2018 to invite in the Minister to discuss matters raised at the Foreign Affairs Council Defence, particularly the Common Security and Defence Policies PESCO and other relevant EU proposed initiatives in regard to defence. This meeting also provides an opportunity to have detailed discussion with the Minister on all matters relevant to the Defence Forces. For the purpose of the meeting, the Minister has been requested to provide a brief opening statement dealing with the Foreign Affairs Council with defence matters, and the Minister has also been notified that all matters relevant to the Defence Forces are open for discussion in the subsequent question and answer session. I also welcome, as well as the Minister, his officials here today and thank them for the briefing provided in advance of the meeting. Before we begin, may I remind members, witnesses and those in the public gallery to ensure that their mobile phones are switched off completely for the duration of the meeting, as they cause interference even on silent mode with the recording equipment in the committee room. This meeting is also being broadcast live on Oireachtas TV and across the various media platforms. I remind members of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person or body outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. For witnesses, by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act of 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence in joint committee. If they are directed by the Chair to cease giving evidence on a particular matter and continue to do so, they are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of their evidence. They are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and they are asked to respect the parliamentary practice that, where possible, they should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I now call on Minister Crowe to make his opening statement. Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I just want to provide the Joint Committee with an update on Ireland's position and role in relation to the European Union and Common Security and Defence CSDP and my recent attendance at the informal Ministerial of European Union Defence Ministers at the end of August. My opening statement will update members on a number of main defence developments at EU level since my last appearance on this topic in April of this year. Since my last discussion with you, there has been a Foreign Affairs Council with Defence Ministers held in Luxembourg in June and an informal ministerial held in Vienna in August. On Taoiseach, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade attended the June FAC meeting, and I attended the informal ministerial in August, and I will also be attending the FAC Defence meeting in Brussels on the 19th and 20th of November, where a number of issues I'm detailing this morning will be discussed and progressed further. At the June Foreign Affairs Council meeting with the Defence Minister, a Council decision establishing the common set of governance rules for PESCO projects was adopted. The agreed set of common governance rules are sufficiently robust while providing the correct balance between legal clarity and flexibility. In particular, Ireland has very much welcomed the general agreement to allow Member States to participate as observers in PESCO projects. Observer status can allow participating Member States to keep abreast of developments in a particular area and an example of the inclusive nature of the PESCO initiative. The June FAC also provided Ministers with an opportunity to commence meaningful discussions around the exceptional participation of third states on PESCO projects. The informal ministerial in Vienna on the 29th and 30th of August included an exchange of views on PESCO among other EU defence initiatives. This was an important opportunity for ministers to come together to take stock of the PESCO initiative to date and to chart the key next steps for the way forward. Discussions were open and very constructive. Key areas discussed were the conditions for the exceptional participation of third states and an early draft of the Council recommendation on sequencing of the more binding commitments. The Council recommendation on PESCO commitments provides a more objective and detailed basis for addressing whether PESCO participants are meeting their commitments. I am satisfied that the greater detail does not go beyond the actual commitments agreed in the original decision. The Council recommendation was adopted by the FAC on Monday this week, with the Taoiseach in attendance. Ireland's position in that, with the overall architecture now in place, it is time to focus on the delivery of outputs and outcomes from PESCO projects. Ireland is participating in 2 PESCO projects as part of the first tranche of PESCO projects agreed by FAC Defence in March this year. Ireland is participating in a German-led project to develop a centre of excellence on EU military training missions and a Greek-led upgrade of maritime surveillance systems. Ireland is also an observer on a further 8 PESCO first-round projects. We are currently considering the draft list of possible second tranche PESCO projects. The final list of second tranche projects will be formally approved at the upcoming next month in Brussels. Another key decision in relation to PESCO, which will require ministerial agreement, will be the conditions of exceptional participation of third states in PESCO projects. The FAC in November we intend to support the exceptional participation of third states once their participation is governed by the principle of added value. As discussions in advance of November's meeting progress, I am happy with developments in relation to this matter. The proposed coordinated annual review of defence aims to create greater transparency by sharing Member States' information on future defence policy capability development, budgets and investment. It is expected that such transparency will support greater collaboration between Member States on investment and capabilities. Participation in CARD is open to all Member States on an entirely voluntary basis, recognising the defence policies of Member States, including defence spending and capabilities, is entirely national competence. The detailed implementation and information sharing requirements for CARD will have been developed by the European Defence Agency. They are currently being tested through a trial run that was commenced in the autumn of 2017 involving all Member States. The report and the trial run will feature a part of the FAC Defence in November, where recommendations will be presented, lessons will be identified and the proposed way ahead discussed. It is expected that the first full CARD cycle will be launched in autumn 2019. Ireland, in tandem with most other Member States, supports the voluntary nature of CARD, which also recognises defence policy, including defence spending, and is a national competence. The third peace facility proposal was published by High Representative Maureen in the Commission's support on the 13th of June this year. The report for an off-budget funding mechanism will be an instrument of Common Foreign Security CFSP and CSDP. There are many complicating factors in this proposal which require cross-government consideration. The EPF would draw together and expand existing off-budget mechanisms devoted to security and defence in a number of key areas, including the anti-mechanism and the African Peace Facility. At the FAC in June, Ministers participated in an initial exchange of views in relation to the proposed during the Joint Security and Defence session. In broad terms, Member States expressed the consideration of the proposal was at a very early stage and would require further discussions at EU and national level, given its cross-departmental nature and the level of funding proposed. At the informal ministerial in Vienna in August, Ministers again held tentative discussions about the proposal. The reaction of the majority of Member States has been fairly negative in relation to the overarching changes proposed under the EPF, particularly in relation to amendments to the Athena mechanism and the African Peace Facility. There was a very clear view from Member States that they wished to ensure continued Member States' control of such funding mechanisms and, of the most part, expressed satisfaction with existing governance arrangements. While we want to be positive, we feel it is important for the High Representative and the Commission to recognise that Member States' review of proposals is at a very, very early stage. It is expected that the EPF will be a topic of discussion at the November FAC. However, no Council decision or recommendation regarding the EPF will be considered for adoption. This stage in the process is some way off yet. I look forward to a transparent, inclusive and realistic discussion on this in due course. On the 8th of June last year, the Council adopted a decision establishing the military planning and conduct capability within the EU military staff. The establishment of the MPCC was a very important operational decision in providing a military planning competent to match the existing civilian planning component. The actions of both the civil and military planning components is coordinated through a joint support coordination cell which supports the EU comprehensive approach to crisis management. In June last year, the MPCC assumed command of EU non-executive military CSDP missions, including the EU training mission in Mali, where the Defence Forces are contributors. The Council decision established the MPCC, including a stipulation that a review of the mechanism should be carried out after a year of operations, but no later than before the end of 2018. The review process is currently underway and was a topic of discussion at the informal ministerial in August. The informal meeting offered ministers the chance to provide initial thoughts on both the activities of the MPCC to date and the scope of the eventual review. It is anticipated that the MPCC review will be an agenda item at the November FAC in terms of recent report issued by the HRVP Maureen regarding the review. We are in agreement that the MPCC, appropriately configured and supported through a fully operational joint support conciliation cell, can potentially deliver more effective, responsive CSDP civil and military operations, thereby contributing in a meaningful way to the EU's comprehensive approach. We support the current function and scope of the MPCC, although neither the MPCC nor the Joint Support Coordination Cell are yet considered to be fully operational. We, like other Member States, look forward to fully examining the proposals put forward by High Representative. This will include consideration of operations for possible further development of the MPCC on a phased basis. As I acknowledged during my last appearance here, the issue of military mobility has gained prominence on the EU agenda, given difficulties that countries have experienced in moving their troops through other EU countries for the purpose of training and exercises. At the European Council in June, attended by Taoiseach, Ireland welcomed the fact that the Council conclusions adopted recognised the full respect to be given to the sovereignty of EU Member States over their national territory and national decision-making process regarding military movements. The European Union Military Committee have prepared military requirements document. This document is currently under review, and this is an issue that goes beyond defence. Discussions between the Department of Defence and other relevant departments in relation to military mobility requirements is ongoing. It is anticipated that military mobility and related PESCO projects will be discussed at the FAC meeting in November. On the 13th of June 2018, the Commission put forward proposals for the regulating establishment for the European Defence Fund under the 2021-2027 annual financial framework. The Defence Fund is divided into two strands, or windows: research and capability development and acquisition. The focus on the fund is on the development of new research and technology in the defence sector. Activities under both the research and capability development acquisition windows will be linked to the defence capability priorities agreed by Member States. Ireland sees the fund as a means of supporting the development of EU military capabilities for CSDP operations. Ireland's position on the proposed €13 billion to be dedicated to the European Defence Fund, €4.1 billion to the research window and €8.9 billion to the capability window will be addressed in the context of discussions about multi-annual financial framework. Discussions are ongoing at an interdepartmental level in this regard. Council conclusions on migration adopted by the European Council in June noted that breaking the business model of smugglers in the Mediterranean required a new approach based on shared complementary actions among the Member States to disembarkation of those who are saved in search and rescue operations. The Italian authorities have sought to progress this aspect of the June conclusions as quickly as possible. This resulted in a call for the strategic review of Operation Sophia to be brought forward for discussions, which was. The report on the strategic review was considered at the EU level. Further discussions in relation to future disembarkation arrangements in the Mediterranean are ongoing. It was noted at the August Defence Ministerial meeting that the matter of disembarkation of migrants is broader than CSDP, where it was initially discussed in the context of implications for Operation Sophia. It is recognised that the political discussions and direction from Justice and Home Affairs Ministers and Head of State or Government are necessary to progress this issue. It will have a clear importance for the future of common European asylum systems for the wider EU migration policy. At present, Operation Sophia continues to operate under its original mandate. In anticipation of the NATO summit in July of this year, the June FAC involved a working session on EU-NATO cooperation. Throughout the 2018 EU-NATO cooperation remains a feature of the defence landscape within the European Union, given that 22 of the 28 member states are also members of NATO, sharing strategic interests and facing similar security challenges. NATO and the European Union cooperate on issues of common interest, particularly in the areas of crisis management, new security threats and capability development. Following on from the 2016 joint declaration on EU-NATO cooperation, a second joint declaration on EU-NATO cooperation was signed in Brussels in July of this year by the Presidents of the European Council and the EU Commission and the NATO Secretary-General Stoltenberg. This declaration offered a key opportunity for two organisations to take stock of achievements to date and to look forward. In June of this year, the third progress report on the EU-NATO cooperation was also issued by the EU and NATO. It did not identify any new areas of cooperation and was positive regarding the overall progress to date. Key areas of cooperation include countering hybrid threats, operational cooperation including maritime issues, cyber security and defence, military mobility, women, peace and security and capacity building. Ireland welcomes greater EU-NATO cooperation where it contributes to internal peace and security and is focused on avoiding duplication of structures, systems and interoperability standards. This ensures better coherence and effectiveness on the ground in peace support and crisis management operations. It is important to note that both the recent joint declaration and the 2016 Warsaw joint declaration confirmed that EU-NATO cooperation will be fully respectable in decision-making autonomy of both organisations and will not prejudice the specific charter of the security and defence policy of any member states. This is a strong acknowledgement that Ireland's policy on neutrality and non-NATO membership will in no way be affected by enhanced cooperation. In conclusion, Chairman, throughout 2018 Ireland has remained fully engaged in all CSDP processes. This is important given the vital role that the EU plays in support of international peace and security, and the UN. Fully participating in these developments ensures that Ireland continues to have a voice and to influence the evolution of the EU defence and security policy. Efforts are ongoing by EU member states within the treaty provisions to respond to the challenging security environment we all face. These efforts are being advanced through the implementation of the EU Global Strategy of Foreign Policy and Security, the Commission's European Defence Action Plan, and through enhanced cooperation with international partners including UN and NATO. In relation to the EU's relationship with the UN, I would like to highlight that in early September Ireland was instrumental in the adoption of Ireland's conclusions endorsing the priorities of UN-EU strategic partnership on peace operations and crisis management for the period of 2019 to 2021. In the conclusions, the Council recognised the mutually beneficial nature of the long-standing UN-EU cooperation on peacekeeping and civilian peace and military crisis management. Ireland is very closely engaged in supporting greater cooperation and dialogue between the EU and the UN. At each ministerial meeting, I take the opportunity to meet Jean-Paul Lecoq, the Under-Secretary-General for Peacekeeping, to review Ireland's engagement with the UN and reflect our positive support and commitment to EU and UN cooperation. In conclusion, I would like to state that our defence forces and the wider defence organisation are making an invaluable contribution to the international peace and security and conflict resolution. This is achieved through their ongoing and professional engagement with EU, UN, EU, NATO, OSCE and other international engagement with bilateral context. Finally, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity presented by today's welcome invitation. Engagement in defence issues and policy matters in the forum can add to the existing public discussion on defence issues and also can highlight the important dynamic work being carried out from an international perspective by the Department of Defence and the Irish Defence Forces.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your detailed outline of discussions and happenings in the European Union. Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much. It's very detailed, so I just have a couple of questions, and they're quite specific. In relation to the budget, defence budget, there has been, an increase, but it would appear, and you might clarify this, that there's a bigger increase for the capital expenditure. Now, we know that there are outstanding issues in relation to the pay of the Defence Forces, and we're hearing about, the numbers who are leaving, etc. And yes, we value our Defence Forces so much. So how high of a priority is it in order to address those outstanding issues that have been allowed to develop for quite a while? I did have a question with you about the possibility of the buying of an MRV vehicle, and I'm told that you're not buying it, and again, just like that, clarified. So my question comes then, that's the budget one, is also how are we going to pay for PESCO? We know that it's a considerable cost, but where is that going to come from? Is it coming from the defence budget? You might go into a little bit about what exactly is meant by the principle of added value, and what are these capabilities that we're going to be investing in. I just can't be struck but by the irony in the report that on the one hand, particularly in relation to NATO, on the one hand, we're saying that we're very supportive, we welcome greater EU-NATO cooperation, and then at the end of it, this is not going to undermine our policy of neutrality. And I just do not understand how you could put those two sentences in the one section there, because it would appear that, we're being sucked in, dragged in, whatever, willingly or unwillingly, into greater military cooperation and this. I would wonder about the 6 European countries who aren't members of NATO. Do you get together? Do you discuss how you can maintain your neutrality? Because, I think that's very much important. And my last point is, and we've been saying it, some of us were making that point this week on the pre-European Council statements, it is the arms trade that is fueling the conflict situations in the world. We'll be hearing informally later from somebody from Yemen. It is the arms trade from the US to Saudi Arabia that's also facilitated by Britain and France and Germany that is continuing the conflict, not just in Yemen, but in other countries as well. So is there anybody at these council meetings who is addressing that with the members who are there, Britain, France and Germany, how they are continuing these wars with the arms trade that is so lucrative for them? Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Sullivan. Minister.
I'll let you address your last question to Minister Simon Coveney. I think it's more appropriate for him to answer that question. Just on, yes, we had an increase in our budget. The total defence allocation for this year will be, after this budget, will be just €1 billion, 994 million. This is a 5% increase of 47 million from 2018. 29 million in capital funding, 6 million for pay increases. That's under the Public Service Stability Agreement. That's the pay increases they would have received in January of this year and in the 1st of October of this year as well. 2.2 million additional UNIFIL costs and Dormant Accounts funds, and this is provided on an exchequer neutral basis. And also an increase in on the pensions vote of 10 million euros. And also just on, of course, pay and conditions and recruitment and retention is a high priority for myself. I think I've spoken about this on numerous occasions on the public record. That is why members of the Defence Force, like all members of the public service, would have increased pay this year under the Public Service Stability Programme, which was the negotiated pay deal gone out, that's out until 2020. And under anyone, by the time that pay deal is concluded, anybody under 70,000 euros and under will have had their pay restored. And in parallel to that, we have the Independent Pay Commission, which my department and Defence Management, Military Management, have been engaging fully with over the last number of months. I'm not aware, but there would have been a joint military management and civil submission to the Independent Pay Commission would have been submitted in September, early September of this year, and we expect that will be reported upon in the first quarter of next year. I will hope in the first quarter of next year. There's quite a considerable amount of work has to be done on that. I know there's an amount of interface at the moment between the Pay Commission and the members of the Defence Forces. You asked there, how will PESCO be funded? Joining PESCO does not involve any additional costs to the Exchequer, and I stated that on our intention to join PESCO when it was first muted. Additional costs may arise in respect of participation in specific PESCO projects, similar to the case where the Defence Forces participate in European Defence Agency projects, as projects will relate to the ongoing development of the Defence Forces capabilities for peace support and crisis management operations, such as costs will be incurred in the normal course, and they will therefore be met from within the Department of Defence vote. And it is expected that sharing the cost of capability developments across a number of member states should prove cost neutral in terms of the overall project defence expenditure. You spoke there about regarding our policy on neutrality in NATO. We are members of Partnership for Peace within NATO, and of course we meet on an ongoing basis with other members of Partnership for Peace who might have a common policy like ourselves on neutrality. Just on the arms issue there that you went about, but it's more for Minister Horkan. But for many countries, the defence industry is a significant element of their economy and a significant employer. As the Commission moves to apply single market principles to the defence industry sector, access to Commission instruments in support of conciliation and increased efficiencies in the sector, including the EU research and development funds, can come into play. The focus of the plan is not specific in any arms industry, but focuses on the development of new research and technology in the defence sector. In the widest senses, this includes the application of commercial and civilian technologies within the defence sector. And we're all aware Ireland does not have a defence industry. However, we do have particular strengths in the area of dual-use technologies and civil commercial technologies, which support defence capability. We must keep in mind that the technologies which will be developed under the action plan will also contribute to the capability of our defence forces when engaged in operations. In order to deliver an effective defence forces, we require leading-edge military equipment and technology, and we will seek to ensure that this initiative delivers on that. I'm not sure, Deputy, was there anything else you
If I could just come back in very briefly, I think it's a little bit splitting hairs to say that there's no additional cost for PESCO, but yet we will be contributing to certain projects within PESCO. I mean, there's still money going to be needed for PESCO. And really, about the arms trade, the EU is the biggest donor when it comes to development aid. So it's okay for the EU to give this aid to those countries that are most in need of aid, poverty, hunger, conflict, whatever. And at the same time, other EU countries will continue to fuel an arms trade that will bomb these countries, that will create all of that. You know, people are not talking to each other. You say about the defence industry, it's a lucrative employer, etc. But look at what it's causing and the extent of the damage that's being done throughout the world by the arms trade. Thanks, Chair.
Chambers.
Thanks, Chair. And you prefer if we bank the questions, or then can we go over and back?
If we have a number of questions together, and then we'll go back to supplementaries if we can, but everybody here has indicated, so
yeah, fair enough.
We'll try to accommodate everybody.
Thank the Minister and his officials for coming before us. My first question, Minister, is to ask if you've read the submission that the Strategic Planning Branch from the Chief of Staff's Division made to your department on the 19th of February 2018. If you can outline if you've read it and what your view of it is. So I'm just going to go through parts of it here. In terms of family income supplement, it says that the Minister's approach and the Department of Defence your commitment does not tally, what you've done does not tally with the government's commitment to its loyalty to the Defence Forces as articulated by the Taoiseach. And the media coverage of numbers of the Defence Forces personnel in receipt of FIS has had an impact on both the recruitment and the retention of personnel in the Defence Forces. It also states that, I know there's been some disagreement on this, it states from the Strategic Planning Branch that an alarming number are actually eligible for FIS. So in the Strategic Planning Branch, post LRA 2 pay increases, it says that 1,760 members of the Defence Forces are eligible for FIS. That's from the Strategic Planning Branch. Can you outline what your view on that is in the context of the current issues around recruitment and pay, and if you accept the view of the Strategic Planning Branch? Also, I just want to ask questions around whether you incorporated any of the recommendations made in this report as part of the Department's submission as part of the Public Pay Commission. As you know, air traffic control has been curtailed to daylight hours. Air transport contracts has had to be outsourced. Naval service operations have been curtailed. We've got a massive recruitment and retention crisis. Can you outline what the update on any retention policy is from your department, and have you got one? It says in the report here, it says that the current trend of premature voluntary retirement from the Defence Force is not sustainable. The Defence Force cannot continue to commit such a high proportion of its resources to training increasingly large recruit and cadet intakes to the detriment of enhancing and evolving its capabilities to meet the threats of the dynamic operating environment. It also says the Defence Forces cannot recruit its way out of this current situation. Retention must be the focus of restoring the strength of Defence Forces. Can you provide clarity? I know we had oral questions there in the last couple of weeks. What recommendations from this submission to your department have been included in the department's submission to the Public Pay Commission? You stated that no recommendations were made by the department on the floor of the Dáil, despite this report containing multiple recommendations. And you also tried to stated that it wasn't your role to make recommendations, but actually the terms of reference of the Public Service Stability Agreement 2018 to 20 outline that you can make recommendations and you can provide the data. So I'd just like to know what your view on that is. And do you accept the report that was submitted to you in the context of multiple recommendations? I just want to ask some more questions there. Can you outline what the status of the military management submission is, and just provide clarity on that? And it was reported in the media that the Department of Defence submission to the Public Pay Commission failed to include all of the relevant points raised by military management in their submission to the Department of Defence. So I think we need, as a committee, to know what the level of agreement is. Are you at one on the issue of pay, on the issue of retention, on the issue of recruitment? Because we saw the Chief of Staff, and this is his specific division and is the strategic unit within his branch. He said he's going to make a plea to the Public Pay Commission on behalf of the members of the Defence Forces. Is that because there's a wedge between his view and the submission made by your department? And I think we need more clarity on that. Did your department fully embrace the report of military management? And what recommendations did your department make to address the ongoing trained manning levels issues of the Defence Forces? And the terms of reference actually allows for that in terms of submissions. What recommendations did the military management make in their submission to address the ongoing manning levels of the Defence Forces? And did you incorporate anything that they've outlined in your own submission? Because media reports seem to suggest that that's different. Can you outline, just in terms of the air ambulance, have you received any military advice around concerns with the continuity of the air ambulance service, and can you provide some clarity on that? So, just in terms of the, what is your and your department of what I suppose I think you need to provide clarity on that, and perhaps I can come back in, Chairperson. I also want to ask, on a separate matter, what is the status of the application of the EU Working Time Directive to the Defence Forces in compliance with the ECJ ruling? And do you accept that the public plea of the Chief of Staff was an inference of his lack of confidence in the so-called joint submission that was made? And perhaps you could provide clarity on conversations you've had with him, because I know he's coming before this committee, I think, before Christmas, so he'll be able to provide clarity on that. I also want to ask about the CASA tender. There's obviously a 30-year-old plane. What's the update on that tendering process? There's obviously capital allocation for that as well, and there's a timeline for it, so just maybe you can provide some clarity on that too.
Thanks, Deputy Chambers, and when people get the first round of questions, we can go back in supplementaries if they're needed. So, Minister.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, you spoke there that an indifference between the Defence Forces and the senior military management and the civil management. There is absolutely no indifference whatsoever that both parties signed off on the submission for the Pay Commission. I read the Strategic Planning Branch's document earlier this year. What the Pay Commission looked for was data and statistics and trends within the Defence Forces on recruitment and retention and different areas as well. This has been a very detailed submission signed off by both military management and the civil side. It goes to almost 150 pages. As I stated earlier to Deputy O'Sullivan, that there is interaction between the Pay Commission, the Independent Pay Commission, and the Defence Forces happening right at this moment in time, and have been for quite some time, on the submission that was there. But let me state, Deputy, that what the Pay Commission requested, what the Pay Commission looked for, right? This is what they looked for in correspondence from them, was data, specific data. They look for statistics, they look for trends, and I have to commend officials from my own department. They put a huge amount of work into this, and this is not just going back on what happened 6 months ago. This is going back over what happened over the last number of years, where the challenges and where the pinch points are. So a huge amount of work has gone into this document, and both military management and the department signed off on this. This is a joint submission. So if somebody has an indifference with the submission, they would have stated, they wouldn't have signed the document. Both of them parties signed this document, and this has gone into the Pay Commission.
But none of the recommendations were included.
What I will say is, let me also say that the Strategic Planning Branch were very much involved in the data that was collected for this document as well, in working in collaboration with the department. Just on the working family payment that you spoke about. This is directly from Department of Social Protection. So, but
the eligibility is in the strategic.
Look, Deputy. If you were entitled to something, I think you go and claim it. Okay. That's the way it is. If you're entitled to something, you can claim it. Members of the Defence Forces know full well. They know if they're entitled to family income supplement or no working family payment now, they can go and claim it. And I know for a fact that the representative organisations will help them and assist them in that if needed to do so. There are less than 200, I think there's 170 people within the Defence Organisation. And when I say the Defence Organisation, I mean the Department of Defence, and I mean within the Defence Forces that are in receipt of the working family payment. Like, I've seen a document only in the last number of days I forget whose document it was, saying that there's 20% of members of the Defence Forces in receipt of the working family payment. 20%. There's less than 1% of the organisation. Yes, it's not acceptable, but the working family payment is there for specific reasons. I've no doubt there's many people within other organisations that are in receipt for the working family payment. So I'll just give you an example, to give you a clear example. If a 23-year-old joins the Defence Forces, and he might have one, he might have two, he could have 3 kids. Well, the working family payment is there. You just can't take that person out and say, we're going to pay him 40,000 euros. That would be totally unfair to other members of his, to his peers at the same level. Well, we're going to pay him 40,000 euros, but we're only going to pay this person, a 3-star, newly recruited, 27,000. But the working family payment is there for a reason, with the family circumstances of that person. And that's the reason it is there for. And so, let me state, I think you should go and look at it. If there's people entitled to it...
I'm quoting from the military management document.
Look, I can report from the real statistics from the department. I can...
the Minister.
I'm quoting from the Chief of Staff's office.
That's Chambers, I'll bring you in later.
Chairman, I can report directly from the Department of Social Protection. They are the real figures. Who are people in receipt of the working family payment. This is the submission that you spoke about, the Pay Commission. The submission has been, as I've stated, it's a set of statistics, data-led. It is a huge job of work has gone into this submission over the last number of months. It was submitted in early September. I would hope that we will have that report and the recommendation to governments by the first quarter of next year.
Delayed, so is it?
No, it's not delayed.
I thought it was meant to...
Please, I'm going to ask people to speak through the chair.
Minister,
you respond to the questions and no more interruptions, Deputy Chambers. I'm going to bring you back in on supplementaries. Yeah. Minister, I'm conscious that Deputy McLoughlin and Senator McFadden have commitments in the Dáil and Shannon Chamber. I want to bring both of them in before, as soon as possible. Minister. I hope that the Independent Pay Commission Chairman can report to back and make recommendations to Government by Q1 in 2019. The pilot submission, I understand, recommendation will be made to Government by the end of this year, and Government will recommend or will consider the recommendations made by the Pay Commission on that occasion. On the air ambulance that you spoke about, there was a number of options came back from the Air Corps. As you know, there's a huge pile of shortages, and that has been highlighted previously from the Air Corps. I put that on the public record. The air ambulance is safe. The air ambulance will continue to operate. It has been an absolutely fantastic service for the Midwest and for the whole of Ireland. The working time directive, there is a civil military group set up on the working time directive, and also there is discussions with PD4 on the issue as well. And I know that the Department of Social Protection are looking after the legislative side of it. On the CASA, request for proposals was asked earlier this year. The final competitive request for tenders is being finalised and will be issued shortly to the shortlisted companies. Thanks, Minister. Deputy McLoughlin, then Senator McFadden.
Another engagement at 10:15. Minister, thanks very much. You're very, very welcome. But a number of members have highlighted, I suppose, first of all, about what has been in the media for the last while, and that's in relation to the pay for Defence Forces. And this has been highlighted for the last weeks and months, which the Pay Commission is currently examining. But could you maybe outline in relation to the non-pay factors that also contribute to the retention of employees in any organisation? And can you advise what has been done on the non-pay front in order to help retain serving members of the Defence Forces? And also, can you, Minister, confirm if you are providing increased opportunities for Defence Forces members or Defence Force members to serve overseas. What is the incentives there? And finally, just Minister, it has been brought to my attention, and I've met quite a number of the colleagues who are living in Sligo, and it's in relation to the difficulties and additional recoverable costs which Army personnel from the west of Ireland face. These are people that are operating out of Finner Camp when tasked with covering 24-hour duties in Dublin, and that this specific aspect will also have to be looked at in the Pay Commission, or will it be part of the Pay Commissioner's detail? Thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Thank you, Minister, for being here today and your officials. In your presentation, you said the organisation are making an invaluable contribution to international peace and security and conflict resolution, and I have no doubt of your pride and appreciation for the Defence Forces. I see it anytime I see you face to face and dealing with members of the Defence Forces. However, I think we can't forget and not mention what goes on at home, and the Defence Forces are always the first people that we call to when there's difficulty with flooding or snow or whatever, and they're always there and ready to come out and support us. And I never hide the fact that I have an enormous grow for the Defence Forces, and I find it very difficult to equate how we can be so proud of them on the one hand, and on the other hand we have this issue with pay and conditions, and that they are the lowest paid public servants, and no matter what comes out of the Pay Commission report, the likelihood is they will remain the lowest paid public servants. There is reportedly 30-odd million euro that is in the department that cannot be paid out because we don't have the numbers. We're down below what we said in the white paper back in the day. And that money will have to go back because it's not being paid in salaries. And I suppose what I would love to know is why can't you and the department fight for to be allowed to use that money to pay the soldiers? The duty pay, which was absolutely has to be looked at. Nobody should do a full week's work in the Defence Forces and then do a 24-hour duty on the weekend and then go back into work. And, you know, people say, well, you get time in lieu for it. Well, time in lieu does not pay the ESB bill or put food on the table. So that's not any good, I believe. So that 30-odd million could be used to restore the duty pay. The cook technician pay, which is going on since, well, the first time I got involved in it was 2012, and I had many people come to me back in the day. 3 of them were very good friends of mine, and I'm sad to say that 2 out of the 3 of those people are dead now and never got their cook technician pay. And also the provision of free rations and accommodation for recruits and apprentices. I can't understand how a recruit would have to go to a camp and pay for his rations and accommodation as part of his training. I don't think it's good enough. And that 30-odd million, surely to God that could be used to pay for that. And I know people will say, well, that will cause a domino effect with teachers and nurses and whatever. But that actual money is in the department, and it's the department's the department should be able to use it whichever way it wants to. And following on from that, I would suggest then, why is the Chief of Staff, why does he not have accounting officer's status? That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, he should be able to do these things. He's a very capable academic, and he has military knowledge, and I think he should be allowed to use it. I also would like to ask you, Minister, I know you've mentioned it already, but the air ambulance is of huge concern to me with the lack of pilots that we have, and with what happened with the Navy and ships not being able to depart. I'm concerned about the air ambulance. I fought very hard for that air ambulance to be maintained after the pilot scheme in Athlone, and I would hate to see that it would be in any difficulty. It's not all bad news, as you said yourself, and on previous occasion. And with that in mind, I absolutely acknowledge what happened yesterday, where you announced that the budget for ONE went up from 44,000 last year to 100,000 this year, and that's fantastic, because ONE are a fantastic organisation looking after ex-servicemen. And I also acknowledge the 4.1 million that went into Athlone for the dining hall. All these things are positive, and the money that's been spent on capital projects, but none of them are any good if we don't have soldiers. And if we don't pay them, we won't get them. The only way to retain soldiers is to pay them properly. And I would urge you, Minister, to look into the duty pay, the cook technicians' pay and others, and look at using that 30 million. Fight to use that 30 million to look after our Defence Forces. Gerard.
Thanks, Senator. Minister.
Thank you very much. First of all, I will just address Minister Deputy McLaughlin's questions. In around the non-pay initiatives, a huge amount of non-pay initiatives that are and retention that are there, and opportunities for members of the Defence Forces. The review of contracts is continuing. And I know that my own department and the rep organisations are working on that, and this will allow those who have served 12 years extended service up to 21 years were recently revisited. This prevented the discharge of a significant number of individuals who would have met the who would have had to retire, but we extended that was something that I told PD4 at the conference in 2017 that I would review, and the Department and PD4 worked and Defence Force worked closely on that. There are a number of other initiatives. There are significant opportunities for career progression in the Defence Forces. To date, in 2018, there has been over 600 promotions in the PDF. So a promotion means a pay increase, which is quite rightly, but there has been over 600 promotions since the 1st of January this year. So that means 1 in 15 serving members received a promotion since the 1st of January. There are ongoing opportunities to undertake career development courses in the Defence Force that made significant inroads in ensuring that major courses acquire external accreditation, especially around the NCO's course, which is accredited by Carlow IT. I will in the next 3 weeks, I think, I will attend the conferring of members of the Defence Force and Carlow IT. I'll just give you one, Deputy, an example of the possibilities of people. At last year's conferring in Carlow IT, there was a guy in his late 20s come up to me, and he came into the Defence Forces with no leaving cert. He got a leaving cert while a serving member of the Defence Forces. He was then given an opportunity to attend a third level in Carlow IT, and there he received a third level qualification. So, like, I know people will always look at the negativities, but there's a huge amount of positive stuff happening out there as well. And I think that is one clear example, and that's only one person, and there's many more. I was at Loan yesterday where I met the OC. I asked him specifically about how many people has he going through completing their leaving cert. There's quite a number of them, and there's many other examples in all barracks and installations right across the country. In 3 weeks' time, as I said, I will attend Carlow IT, and there will be a couple of hundred members, 300 members of the Defence Force, I think it is, will receive a third level qualification, and that is paid by the Defence Forces. It's an investment into the Defence Forces that these people can then use their qualification to further develop themselves, but also within the Defence Force organisations. There are ongoing opportunities for individuals to apply their military skills at home and overseas, which is absolutely a key motivator. This year, you spoke, and I'll include this in this reply. We're sending over a full battalion to UNIFIL in Lebanon in the end of November. There will be over 100 people on that occasion will never have served overseas, but this will be their first trip overseas. The experience that any member of the Defence Forces get when they go overseas, and they will say that themselves, is absolutely, it is for a career progression for themselves, is absolutely fantastic. There are many other, for the first time in 10 years, we had commissioned from the ranks. where they will be, I think it's 23 or 24 members of the enlisted personnel will have an opportunity to be become commissioned officers of Oakley here. That's the first time that this happened in 10 years. This will continue to happen. I think it is so important that we give these people an opportunity to be commissioned from the ranks. Also, we have in overseas, so people serving overseas, if they cannot serve for 6 months overseas, we have they can break it and serve for 3 months, and somebody else can come over then in their place and serve for 3 months. Maybe it's a father with a large number of children that cannot stay away or whatever. It could be a mother who wants to serve overseas but cannot serve for 6 months because maybe she might have a young family, but they want to have that opportunity to serve overseas. Also, we have where people maybe that might be office based within the Defence Forces. They might be living in Galway, they might be living in Cork, they might be serving in Cork, they might be living in Dublin, where they can work from their own home base for 2 to 3 days a week in the local barracks, and then they can go to their base where they're working then for the other remainder of the week. So there's quite a number of non-pay stuff that is happening out there at the moment. Also, the expansion in Unifield will provide an additional 119 people overseas. This continued deployment of the naval service in the Mediterranean also provides significant opportunities for people in the naval service personnel. Currently we have 620 people serving overseas. That will increase by year end. On people. What else would you something else you asked? I'll come back to it.
Yeah, I mentioned in relation to Finner Camp and.
Oh yes, that is something. Yes, absolutely. I've acknowledged that, and it's something that military management are looking at. But I have acknowledged that, and I've spoken to the Chief of Staff and military management on that issue as well.
That's a very serious situation. I think it's. Thanks very much indeed, Chairman. Thanks,
okay.
Minister. Excuse me, please.
To Deputy McFadden. I think I've addressed the paying conditions and the submission that we have gone into the Pay Commission. Is that okay if you?
Yeah, that's.
That. The 24-hour duty allowance, that will be all part of the submission that we have put in. You spoke there about the cook tech pay and the adjudications. My own department has, there are a number of outstanding adjudications, findings across the public service, and the Defence Forces are including the Defence Forces, which cannot be implemented having regard to the provision of the financial emergency measures in the Public Interest Act 2009 to 2015. There are 4 adjudication findings outstanding in relation to the defence sector: increase in tech pay for cooks, supervisory cooks from Group 2 to Group 3, subject to successful completion of 2 training modules and completion of 4 years as cooks with effective from the 1st of June 2006, increase in the Army Ranger Wing allowance increased to €200 per week with effect from the 1st of June 2006, regime in charging recruits and apprentices for rations and accommodation during their training period. Account holders allowance should continue to be applied to NCOs who have taken up duty since the 1st of January 2012. The Public Service Stability Agreement 2018 to 2020 provides for consideration of the process to address the outstanding adjudications right across the public service, and having due regard to the question of their continued validity and cost implications. Just on this specific issue, discussions in this regard with the relevant representative association have commenced just last week. I know my own officials and PD Fora were in discussion specifically on these issues last week, and I hope that we can reach an agreement on these matters, because it does have, there's no doubt it has a financial reward for the people with outstanding adjudications, but also it has a financial reward for recruits and for apprentices who pay for the ration allowance. The air ambulance, yes, we have a number of challenges within the Air Corps. I've spoken to both military management and my own department officials. The air ambulance is a very important service within the Midwest. I'd be first to acknowledge that. It has saved lives, and I have stated that this service needs to be kept and continued out of Athlone.
A number of questions. I'm going to concentrate first on the presentation you gave, and there's a whole range of other issues, but there is contradictions, obviously, in the government approach in working with military alliances which are non-neutral, and there's also contradictions in terms of committing to enhancing capabilities while not being able to deliver on existing capabilities and commitments in this country, such as the air ambulance, which you just mentioned, being an aid to the civil powers. Given the state of the Defence Force at the moment, it cannot in any shape or form fully deliver on the aid that would have been delivered in the past to the civil powers in the event of humanitarian disasters, in terms of flooding and the other operations that has contributed, but also in terms of fishery protections. So there is contradictions making commitments in Europe on the Common Defence and Security Policy, in the European Defence Funds, the European Peace Facility, European Defence Agency, the Military Planning and Conduct Capability, or the Coordinated Annual Review of Defence. They're all ones that in recent years this government and previous governments have committed and committed and committed again, and each one ties Ireland into enhancing our capabilities, yet it hasn't delivered on our own, if you want, emerging needs, and so more and more of the demands are being set on men and women in the Defence Forces who are already overstretched and finding it very difficult to deliver on the day-to-day commitments that they have as soldiers or as Air Corps or naval personnel. Let's see. In terms of PESCOs, we've had this argument, so I'm not going to go back over the argument on PESCO. I want to ask how many officials or members of the Defence Forces are committed to the existing projects that you mentioned as observers in the PESCO projects. In terms of you mentioned that the Council recommendation on PESCO commitments provide a more objective and detailed base for assessing whether PESCO participants are meeting their commitments. Are we meeting the commitments that you have? Will we meet the commitments in the forthcoming year, given the chaos that we have in the Defence Forces and not a very enhanced budget that was presented last week in terms of Defence Forces? You mentioned the second tranche of projects. The final list will be formally approved next month. Have you got that list? Will you provide us with even the indicative list of the second tranche of PESCO projects, so that we can have some evaluation of whether Ireland should or should not opt in to those projects? In terms of the card, I presume we're getting the red card in this instance, because the proposed coordination annual review on defence, that one of the commitments in that, if my memory serves me, is that they would have the ability to look at the defence budget and make recommendations and assess it on an annual basis. So even though I don't think it's fully operational, given that the budget is now being delivered, has there been any comment informally, because you were at an informal meeting, informally from the other Ministers of Defence in relation to the defence budget? Let's see, where else? The European Union Military Committee. This is to do with military mobility, and again, can't even get the planes or the helicopters off the ground or the ships out of port. And yet you're signing up to military mobility. You mentioned in it that the European Union Military Committee, so the military command of the EU Army, have prepared a military requirements document, and this document is currently under review. Will you supply us with a copy of that document so that we as parliamentarians can have some input into that, into Ireland's approach to that document, or at least kind of come back to you on it in the near future, because it is anticipated that that document, or at least the military mobility issue, will be discussed at the Foreign Affairs Committee, the European Foreign Affairs Committee, in November, so it's a very short period. The Defence Fund, 13 billion to be dedicated to European Defence Fund, so research window, and again I have criticised Ireland having anything to do with enhancing defence research in this way, while we have major issues in terms of people dying of starvation, people dying in seas on their way to Europe and that. So again, what is being committed? Is there any commitment? What is the effect in terms of Ireland of that 13 billion defence fund? In terms of the EU-NATO cooperation, you mentioned that that Ireland are members of the Partnership for Peace, which is a part of NATO. That's your own words. Yet we're supposed to be a neutral country, and there's a contradiction in that. Have you kind of, again, I think you mentioned that kind of we are a neutral state in the end of that part of that contribution, but have you expressed this kind of, and why are we still a member of an organisation which is not neutral? Just very briefly, the meeting was an informal meeting, so I don't really understand why it's informal and why it's not, and why the other ones are formal. If it's informal, have you discussed with your counterparts issues which other members have alluded to, how they've overcome issues in terms of retention of personnel, the issue of failure to retrain recruits in particular? So you have a huge number of recruits applying, and when it's whittled down through the process, then you have kind of the required number, but then they continuously leave. Have you discussed with the counterparts again in relation to the European Working Time Directive or the trade union membership? Those issues are quite pertinent issues kind of that I've raised with you in relation to chemical poisoning of members of the Air Corps. Kind of other countries in Europe have been and are addressing those issues, and the issue that I have raised, and there's a Dáil motion passed in relation to the use of larium. So all of the counterparts at this stage will have ended their use of larium as a drug of first choice in dealing with malaria. So that'll do for now, I think.
Minister.
Wide-ranging number of questions there. First of all, you spoke about aid to civil power, and the Defence Force organisation not able to meet all of its requests. I have no proof that we are unable to meet the requests that have been under aid to the civil power. You specifically spoke there about I presume you are talking about the Sea Fisheries Protection Agency. While the Naval Service faces challenges in terms of crew availability in the Naval Service and patrol days output in the year end and going on 2017, output in 2017 was 25% up on the output of compared to 2014. And given the Naval Service output in terms of patrol days to the end of August 2018, the total Naval Service output for all 2018 should be close to numbers of to 2017. And I'll just go through them. In the 2013, the number of patrol days carried out were 1382. In 2014, there were 1127. 2015, there were 1204. In 2016, there were 1376. In 2017, there were 1408. And to date, in August, right up until the end of August of 2018, it's just heading for 1,000. So we have any request that it be from whatever aid in Garda Síochána, Customs and Excise, the Sea Fisheries Protection Agencies, we have been able to provide the service that they requested. And like you spoke about the day-to-day demands of the Defence Forces, of course, there's huge demands upon, like, we'll probably see this winter as we did last winter, let it be snow, let it be storms or whatever that may be. There will be demands on the Defence Forces, of course, and that is expected. But we have, under aid to civil power, we have been able to fill all of the requests under aid to civil power. You spoke there about PESCO and the number of personnel that are will be involved in. Ireland is currently participating in 2 PESCO projects, one German-led European Union Mission Training Competence Centre project, and the second one is a Greek-led upgrade of the maritime surveillance, and we'll also be observers on a further 8 projects. What I say is, it is still these projects are the current projects are the other projects that you spoke about are very early planning at this moment in time, and there's no specific resources dedicated at this time. But as soon as the other projects are signed off and deputy, I have no issue whatsoever in forwarding them on to you. You spoke there about CARD. That's a reporting mechanism and military mobility. We are total observers to military mobility, and it's entirely voluntary. And we will not. It's observers and kind of monitoring, and we will not be joining up. Regarding CARD, in November 2016, the Council concludes on implementing the EUGS in the area of security and defence. Member States were invited, the High Representative, head of the EDA, to present proposals on the scope and modalities and content of a coordinated annual review on CARD. The objective of CARD is to develop on a voluntary basis a more structured way to deliver identified capabilities based on greater transparency, political visibility and commitment from Member States. CARD will provide a full picture of the European capability landscape, monitor defence plans as well as the implementation of capability development. Priorities access the state of defence cooperation within Europe and identify cooperative opportunities which in turn could be taken up within PESCO and possibly funded under the European Defence Fund. CARD is effectively an analysis of the position in relation to the aggregate European capability landscape. Ireland has participated fully in the process and our trial run bilateral with the European Defence Agency took place on the 14th of December of 17. CARD aggregate analysis was presented at the Capability Directors Steering Board on 28th of June. CARD aggregated analysis presents data aggregated at EU level and identifies initial trends regarding EU capability development as well as information on operational activities collected. And just when you spoke there about we being part of Partnership for Peace within NATO, on all occasions there are many countries that are part of PFP that have a similar policy of neutrality to ourselves, and on all occasions, of course, I respect and we respect our policy on neutrality.
Minister, just very briefly, you said that you had no proof of the Defence Forces not being able to deliver on aid to the civil power. I know for a fact that there is occasions that you can't deliver on aid to the civil power, and we've discussed it before. For instance, the air ambulance requests kind of to transfer children for operations in England. The Defence Forces cannot in any shape or form deliver on the full requirements, and we've admitted that, and you've admitted that. Search and rescue was taken off the Defence Forces in the past because it couldn't commit to being able to fully deliver. Fisheries, we know for a fact that there are vessels which are not on fishery protection duty. Just because they're anchored off the Halbolin or somewhere off the sea does not necessarily mean they're on full duty. I know in the morning, if we had flooding as we had before, that the required equipment and staffing levels is not the same as it was before to deliver as comprehensive an aid to the civil power as before. Nobody is saying that the members of the Defence Forces or the authorities in the Defence Forces are not willing to give kind of the last ounce of strength or last ounce of equipment. That's not the point. The point is that because of the crisis in the Defence Forces, it cannot deliver on the same commitment it did before. So the word has gone out, don't ask or don't officially ask for help because we mightn't be able to deliver. Ask us what we can deliver and then ask for that. So don't ask for too much because it's not, it won't be there.
Well, I'll ask the Minister to reply.
Can I just address that question?
Just to finish the question. Well,
you're finished.
Well,
I said I'd bring people in for a second round. Deputy Grealish.
It's to do with
Deputy Grealish. I said I'd bring people back for supplementaries.
It's to do with the Minister's answer because he said that the patrols.
Deputy,
it's only just one sentence.
No, it's not. It's one sentence too many. Deputy Grealish. Well,
it's pointless truncating it because he was the one mentioned it.
Yeah, well, you made a speech there. You got
I didn't make a speech.
You got good latitude. Deputy Grealish.
This is an answer from himself.
Yeah, but you can go back to him later. Deputy Grealish and then Senator Craughwell.
Minister, to welcome you to the committee and your officials. Minister, I asked a question in the Dáil a number of weeks ago, and one of you replied that came back. Part of the reply was, and I quote from your reply, the Defence Forces have full control over recruitment. And then you said no civilian is involved in this. It is solely the responsibility of the Defence Forces headed by the military management and the Chief of Staff, who is his own people in that recruitment office. I believe, Minister, that is incorrect. I believe that the way the recruitment is done in the Defence Forces, the terms and conditions and the enlistments of the service, regardless of the branch of the Defence, are set by the Minister and the Department of Defence, not the Chief of Staff. The Department of Defence, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform agree the terms and conditions, and then the ad is placed. Only after that then does the Chief of Staff take over. So I think that needs to be corrected, Minister, that it's not the sole function of the Chief of Staff to do the recruitment. Can you just answer that point first? Then I want to come back. Yeah. Okay.
I can't have this interrupt. We're not staying here for the day, Deputy.
Okay, no problem. Okay, can you come back to that point? And the question was asked here again, Minister, about the Chief of Staff being the accounting officer of the Defence Forces. You didn't answer it. I asked it in the Dáil the last day. You didn't answer it. And I want a clear reason from you as to why the Chief of Staff cannot be the accounting officer for the Defence Forces. I think that's the solution for the Defence Forces. It is the Garda Commissioner is the accounting officer for the Garda Síochána. And I'm led to believe that the Chief of Staff cannot as much as spend one red cent without going back to the department for approval. I want that question answered also, clearly answered, that he has to go back. And also, and I want to welcome Mr Mooney here today. I know it's a newly appointed position, and I believe that he is the strategic responsibility for the HR of the Defence Forces. Can you outline exactly what Mr Mooney's role is? And why, and I'm going to say it again, Minister, I'm not going to go over the pay and conditions of the Defence Force, and I think it's an absolute disgrace that we see them out protesting on our streets regarding the conditions that they have. We're all very, very, very proud of the Defence Forces. And you're on there about the FISC. Well, I can tell you, Minister, a lot of members of the Defence Forces are on FISC, but there's no member of the Garda Síochána on FISC, and that's a disgrace. You can see over the weekend with the Poper, the Garda Síochána were paid €30 per hour overtime, and all that the members of the Defence Forces got after tax was €67. That needs to be addressed. So, Minister, the issue regarding no civilian involved in the recruitment, I want that, I'd like an answer on that, and as to why the Chief of Staff cannot be the accounting officer, and why is it he's always looking over his shoulder when he has to make a decision regarding any spending within the Department of Defence. And can you give a clear reason why he cannot be the Chief Accounting Officer like the Garda Commissioner?
Thank you, Deputy Grealish. Senator Craughwell, and then I bring the Minister back on all questions.
Can I answer it?
No. I've introduced a rule, and fairness.
Chairman, I'd like to just add
he will answer it. Senator Craughwell, we've another meeting after this, and we're under considerable time. We won't get the answer we want then. We'll ask the Minister. I'd ask him as well before he leaves if he doesn't answer it. Is that fair enough? Senator Craughwell, some questions now, please.
I'll get through them as quickly as I can. Minister, thank you very much for being here, and thanks to your officials. First point I want to make, Minister, is the Chief of Staff going on national television to say that pay and conditions were his primary concern, and then adding a subscript to that and saying that he wanted to attend the Pay Commission himself. That does not suggest to me that there is any form of unanimous agreement across the pay and conditions of soldiers. It is a most unprecedented step for any Chief of Staff to seek the right to address a commission where the department has already put in their submission. With respect to the Pay Commission, the terms of reference clearly allow for recommendations and initiatives to be taken into account, and I'd like you to explain whether or not the recommendations laid out by the Defence Forces have been submitted to the Pay Commission. I understand the Pay Commission will meet on the 23rd of October, and they will determine the date at which they will provide their report. I would like the Minister to explain how he knows that's going to be Q1 of 2019, given that the Commission has not yet met. Recruitment, Minister, will you accept that you cannot recruit your way out of trouble? And you are in serious trouble at 8,800 establishment at the moment, as against the 9,500 that should be there. I understand that somewhere between 50 and 60% of those applying to the Defence Forces actually never go past stage 1 of the recruitment process, and the overall number of those that actually come through is something less than 10%. With respect to retention, Minister, I've brought this up with you in the Senate several times. There is still no retention policy published by your department. The 2015 white paper needs to be revised. When are we going to see that revision? With respect to the Air Corps, we're buying new CASs and we don't have pilots. Can you say sitting here today that you're proud of the current situation in the Air Corps? Pilots we don't have, air traffic control personnel we don't have. We've contracted out the air ambulance over the next couple of years at a cost of $7 million. We're paying on the double. Again, I've asked this question before. How ready are we to deal with a terrorist situation that might arise in the west of Ireland or in the southwest of Ireland? How quickly could we get a Ranger group down to a hijacked bus in Dingle of American tourists? And if that happens, you know the impact that would have on foreign direct investment. Naval Services, Minister, I'd like you to be able to provide the number of patrol days that have been carried out by the Naval Service. I'd like you also to explain what you understand regarding recruitment versus those leaving. What's the percentage? I'm coming to an end, Chair, thank you. With respect to governance, command and control is falling apart in the system. As of today, the 6th Infantry Battalion has 5 officers out of 25. Not so long ago, the 27th Infantry Battalion had 3 captains and 1 lieutenant running a battalion. That is just totally and utterly unacceptable. Officers are moved around this country at short notice. What does that say about the Defence Force's policy with respect to family friendliness? And finally, Minister, the one thing I will compliment you on is the treatment of the Jadaville heroes. You did pull out all the stops, you did do a job. However, we were told with respect to Jadaville that there were no recommendations for medals, or if there were, they weren't anywhere to be found. I have here a recommendation for 5 military medals for gallantry and 31 recommendations for the Distinguished Service Medal. I also understand that over the entire period of the Congo, there are 196 recommendations for the Distinguished Service Medal. Now, Minister, I understand that is not a function for your department, that is a function for the military. I would ask you, as Minister, will you order a review of all recommendations for DSMs and military medals for gallantry? We shouldn't be mean about medals. We should be able to issue medals to people who were recommended them. And I think it's a terrible indictment of this country that we see generals getting DSMs, and I have a list here of about 20 privates, about 10 corporals, 4 sergeants, 1 company sergeant, 3 lieutenants, a captain, all for DSMs. I have a corporal, a private, 2 sergeants and a company sergeant for the military medal for gallantry. Indeed, one of those sergeants is Sergeant Walter Hegarty, the father-in-law of my niece, who died not recently, not knowing that he had 2 recommendations for DSMs, one of which he was awarded, and a recommendation for the military medal for gallantry. It's simply not good enough. Flattery we do, respect we don't do. So, thank you, Minister. I'm sorry there's a lot there, but I had to get it out.
Thanks, Minister. Now, there's a lot of questions there, starting with Deputy of Snodaigh.
Just on Deputy Grealish's yes, I stand over my contribution to the Dáil in reply to, in the process of recruitment, it is down totally and entirely to members of the Defence Forces. Totally. There is not one civil servant involved in the process, of from the time you apply. So Paul Keogh applies for the Defence Forces.
No.
The question you asked that day, who was involved in the process? From the time a person applies for the Defence Forces till day end, he will never.
Who does the vetting?
He will never. Well, the Garda Síochána does the vetting, in conjunction with the Defence Forces intelligence. All done by. There are absolutely no civil servant involved in the process whatsoever. But what I will say is, setting out the terms and conditions of pay and everything like that, of course that is done by civil servants and members of the department. The exact same process of Garda Síochána. The Defence Forces don't set the pay standards, but it's done within the public service pay. And that is absolutely, of course, that is the, and like all recruitment processes, there is negotiations and between the representative organisations and everything about the terms and conditions with PD4 and RACO and everything like that, and that is done with DF and with my department. But from the time the ad is placed, I think the DF placed the ad, but I'll come back to you on that. But they do place the ad, right? So the Defence Forces place the ad. They do the recruitment campaign, right, to get a budget to carry out that. So I'm very clear on this, Deputy. from the time, the whole process right the whole way through, there is no civil servant involved in that. It is members of the Defence Forces. When I have a recruitment meeting, I bring the Defence Forces to me. Of course I have civil servants with me, but it is DF who run the whole process of recruitment. Regarding the Chief of Staff, arrangements for Defence Forces were reviewed as part of the 2015 White Paper on Defence. I've no doubt you have read the White Paper from cover to cover in 2015. It's a very comprehensive document. And the White Paper on the Defence on that occasion recommended that there would be no change. No change to the accounting officer was recommended in all of the negotiate. I won't say negotiate, but all of the meetings, conversations that brought in people inside out and everything like that. There was absolutely no recommendation within the White Paper on Defence on that scale. But significant aspects of the Defence budget are delegated to the Defence Forces, and decisions on expenditure in these areas rest with the Defence Forces. But larger expenditure, joint groups require high-level planning and procurement groups. Of course, there's the Department oversees that, like the Department of Justice oversees spending within Garda Síochána. Like the Garda Commissioner don't set the pay scales. He has a responsibility for the day-to-day running of Garda Síochána. There's something else you asked me, Deputy.
No, the issue on the just outline. I know Mr. Mooney, that person lies in Anthony, his new role. That I know he's a recently appointed official within the department. Mr. Mooney's role.
Well, I have to say,
no disrespect, I'm asked just.
Yeah, no. Roles that Mr. Mooney are Defence Forces personnel, support services, communications, the CNA, all of that is under the litigation branch. And the new point was to ensure an appropriate focus on HR and to give greater support to that. You're dealing with it like. Let me state that when Mr. Mooney, which is absolutely, and I say in his presence, and I don't want to flatter him in any way,
I'm not questioning
but he is an excellent civil servant, as all of my civil servants are, and I will absolutely, they come in for criticism on occasions, but I will defend every one of my civil servants to the bitter end. They are absolutely outstanding public servants. And I really appreciate the work that they do on a daily basis for the betterment of the Defence Forces. I know that message might not always come through, but these people work for the betterment and the promotion of the Defence Forces. Of course, there's going to be, they have responsibilities and they have to question on occasions Defence Forces, but that's like the very same as in Garda Síochána and everybody else. But let me say, one of the reasons why I was very supportive of a new Assistant Secretary within the department was that European policy has just gone from absolutely so complex over the last number of years, and the previous Assistant Secretary was looking after HR, European policy and all foreign policy and everything like that, and it was just gone, you just couldn't do it. So I was very, when the proposal came to me, I was very in favour of doing that and giving more support to the Defence Forces, and I think they should see that as well, that with the addition of an Assistant Secretary that we have, they are now have the support there, that has much pressure on the person that was carrying out that role previously. Just to Senator Craughwell, look, I've dealt with the Pay Commission, and I don't want to rehash all over again what I've spoken about, but what they've said is about the Chief of Staff looking for FaceTime with the Pay Commission. I don't think it was the Chief of Staff himself, but it was members of the Defence Force senior military management. But before he even said that on TV, I had already requested that there would be interface between the Pay Commission, senior military management and the department. that they will be able to go to it. It'll be line by line, page by page of the submission that we made. And let me state that this has been a joint submission signed off by Mr. Mooney, agreed by both the Defence Forces, military management, and the civil side. And I don't want to repeat what I said, but I will say one thing. The amount of work that went into this submission over June, July and August, right, was absolutely immense. People worked, and of course they have to do it. They worked long hours, curtailed their holidays to make sure and get this submission in on both the military side and the civil side, to get this submission in by the first week in September. And of course, like any organisation, there has to be give and take, and there was cross-party and there was back and forward negotiation, whatever. Of course, but I'm happy with the submission that was submitted to the Pay Commission. There is already interface with the Pay Commission and the Defence Forces, and they will have interface with.
Will you publish it?
No, I won't be publishing it. No, because it's a copy for the Pay Commission, and the Pay Commission will probably publish it when they finish their deliberations. And one thing I did look for last year was the Defence Forces would be one area highlighted, and in fairness they came back, the Pay Commission, after meeting with the Minister for Public Expenditure on Pascal Donoghue, that there's two areas that he highlighted, both the area of health and Defence Forces, and I'm happy and that we will go through this process and we will see a conclusion to this, and let the Pay Commission do their work. They're an independent commission, away from politicians, away from government. They will make recommendations to government, and the government then will consider their recommendations. Just on. You said about 8,800. Actually, it's just 9,000 people to date that are in the PDF that are
in training.
That are our numbers. I'll come back to you with the number of people training to it, but that has always been part and parcel of the numbers. Of course, I've stated that you said that the air ambulance has been contracted out to a private.
Yeah, a private company has got 7 million contract.
No, the air ambulance, the air ambulance out of Athlone is fully operational by the Defence Forces.
I'm talking about the people for Oregon.
Oh no, that's totally no. Actually, somebody else mentioned that as well. That is a service level agreement that we had with the HSE.
Yeah.
There's a big difference in aid to civil power and aid to civil authority. A service level agreement is, if available and when available, that we will provide that service, right?
But realistic, we're never available.
No, we still provide some services to the HSE, and have and will continue to do so. But we came to the challenge that we had to be all up and say, look, we're not able to guarantee the service. We're not able to say that we will be able to fly through the night, whatever the story is. We won't be better 24/7. I'd be wrong of me. I'd be shirking my responsibilities if I didn't go to the Minister for Health and tell him that. You'd be absolutely jumping across the table at me now if some patient had died or something like that. Yeah. No, I'd face up the challenges we have. I've no doubt, and I've said it and stated on numerous occasions. And that is why we're in negotiations with the Pay. We've made a submission to a joint submission to the Pay Commission on pilots, and that will hopefully be concluded before the end of this year. The patrol days on the Naval Service, and I go through. I've stated earlier, in 2013, the number of patrol days carried out by the Naval Service is 1,382. In 2014, it was 1,127. In 2015, it was 1,204. 2016, it was 1,376. In 2017, it was 1,408. And at the end of August of 2018, it was 928. I presume that's up near 1,000 at the moment. And we will. I would envisage if we will match our near match it, or maybe even overtake the number of patrol days in 2017.
Will the rest of that reply that you gave to me, which was the lost days for that year? Because that reply, that's what I was trying to say to you, Philip, because you gave me an answer on the 9th of this month where you listed the lost days, and this year's lost days is already in August.
Absolutely.
What it was last year.
I have said that we have a number of challenges within the naval service regarding a number of issues. I highlighted this over the last number of weeks, Deputy. Let it be personnel, it could be weather, it could be technical issues, whatever that we're not able to get to see. But that's nothing new. We have lost days every year.
Well, we know that, but it's going up.
Yeah, and we're addressing those issues. I've stated that we have our challenges.
I have no problem, but what I'm saying is you're not delivering on the same aid that you did before in terms of aid to the civil power.
No, absolutely. You were absolutely wrong in saying that, Deputy. If any request, right? And I met the CEO of the Sea Fisheries Protection Agency earlier this year in Hall Bowland, on Garda Síochána, the Customs and Excise and everything like that. Any request that they have put into the Naval Service, we have been able to fill those requests. And I'm not sure if you've seen the successful drug interdiction that we had a number of weeks ago in cooperation with Garda Síochána and the Customs and Excise.
That was a fantastic piece of work, but it doesn't explain the ships that lay anchor a couple of miles off the Cork coast and stay out there for a few days.
Senator, I hear all this information as well. But
so are you going to act on it?
But Senator, you put a tweet out a number of weeks ago. You said that all of our ships.
Follow me.
That you all. No, I don't follow you.
Well, you must have.
I don't follow you. No,
you
it's
picked
okay.
up the two.
But you said that all of our ships were tied up. Totally incorrect.
Through the chair, we had 8 ships at that time. One of them was in the Mediterranean. There were 7 masts in Hall Bowland. So unless you've got a couple of spare masts lying around the place down there, they were tied up.
Proceed with the questions that were asked earlier, please, and we're going to go back. Jack Chambers and others indicated that supplementaries. We want to get to them as well, please. So, Minister, proceed.
I got to the Chief of Staff, the Accounting Officer. I done the Deputy Grealish. You're happy, Deputy Grealish, on the medals. Sorry, Deputy. Can I speak to you separately in that? I have no issue speaking to you separately. I don't want to get into that here.
Okay.
Retention
was the other issue. You speak about the white paper. Retention is mentioned once, and it's only one word.
I think I've addressed retention here, the non-pay retention issues that are stuff that I'm carrying out, and also on the pay side as well.
Well, there's a lot of senior NCOs who are due to retire would happily stay on if you'll extend the period.
Well, let me say, all contracts are being looked at, and like that, I can talk to you separately in that.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Minister.
Deputy Chambers, you indicated in some supplementaries.
So, Minister, the white paper implementation has been ongoing since 2015. What tangible projects are concluded and what impact have these projects had on the Defence Force? If you just inform the committee. You mentioned there about there's going to be a report regarding pilots in this quarter. And you seem to refer to the strong argument you made around pilots. Did you make recommendations that related to pilots as part of your submission and not, obviously we know you didn't make recommendations as part of the general submission, so perhaps you can provide some clarity on that. In terms of the Naval Service Patrol Day numbers, is there more leaving than there is being recruited? And also I want to ask about how are you going to address the manning levels issue? There's 1,500 applied this year, which may yield about 150. If you go back to 2012 in the strategic document, there are over 10,000 applying. So we have diminishing numbers applying, greater numbers leaving. The recruitment and retention crisis has reached catastrophic levels with the organisation you lead, and we've yet to see actual recommendations or progress in this area. So how are you going to address the manning levels issue? And also around, just as Senator Craughwell mentioned, the contract for organ transplant flights, obviously that was outsourced because of the shortage of trained staff. So will there be a contagion effect across other areas of the Air Corps? And when do you see this? When do you see you stopping the gap in the context of the diminishing service that can be provided, and also the safety concerns that I know have been submitted to you around the experienced personnel that are leaving the Air Corps. That's a big concern as well. That we're losing very experienced people in that area, and we need progress on it.
Thanks, Deputy Chambers Minister.
Just on the white paper review, the white paper on defence provides the defence policy framework over a 10-year planning horizon. A key commitment made in the white paper is the introduction of a system of fixed cycle reviews to ensure policy remains up to date. The approach is for an up to date every 3 years and a more strategic review every 6 years. The first white paper update review is now underway, and I understand Chairman Aengus coming before the committee the next short while. Yeah. You wrote to the committee. I wrote to the committee.
Oh yes, we have that. We'll discuss that later.
Yeah, so okay. So I think that is. I don't want to get into it. Like if we're going to come back to the committee. Just on the pilot submission, the pilot submission was sent in April of this year, and I expected. What, Deputy? I don't want to. What the Pay Commission looked for off of us, right, is a data. Based submission, and we give them absolutely all the statistics and everything like that, the trends and everything like that around that, right? It is not up to us to make recommendations. It's up to the Pay Commission to make recommendations to government, right? Of course, there's interface going on within the Pay Commission, the department, and military, and of course there's dialogue going on. But it's not up to us. Why would you have a Pay Commission to recommend if we make recommendations to the Pay Commission?
And how do you know? You didn't answer Senator Craughwell's question around Q1 of 2019. Why has there been delay? I think that's another concern of members of the Defence Forces, that now we know there's been a delay on the report for that. And how do you know if they're meeting on October 23rd? How do you know that there is a delay in their report to government?
One thing is my officials tell me the pilot retention scheme that was in place. We did put that into the submission as well.
So you did make a recommendation.
No, we put that into it. That was in place previously.
So that's just, it's good to know, because you're now after saying to the committee that not
a recommendation. We put it in place that was
a recommendation.
That was there previously.
So that you did make a recommendation for pilots, but not for anyone else.
No, Deputy. And what I'm saying is, under that, on the submission that we made to the Pay Commission on the pilot retention, we looked at a number of areas that were there in the past that would have been gone. It's up to the Pay Commission to recommend.
It is up to them, but you should have made recommendations in the other areas. So you mentioned, for example, what you did for on the pilots. But I think there is a morale issue, and the fact that the minister leading the department didn't make recommendations on the basis of the data that you submitted is concerning, and you should have provided greater elaboration on that. And I think it's interesting that you did incorporate a recommendation for pilots, but not for anybody else. And it also shows that you could have made a recommendation, but you decided not to do so, and you could have incorporated some of the recommendations from the strategic office, from the Chief of Staff, and you decided not to do so.
Well, just after we submitted the pilot retention submission, the Pay Commission came back to us looking for data-based evidence on the wider Defence Force organisation, and that's exactly what we put to them. Was the material that they looked for, the Pay Commission looked for, was data-based evidence and trends, and that's exactly what we were requested, and that's exactly what we gave to them on the wider Defence Force organisation. Just on, you spoke there about recruitment trends. In 2000, just general service recruitment, from 2002, I'll go 2,750 people applied, and I'll just go back up, right? 2008, 5,466 people applied. In 2014, 7,332 people applied, and in 2017, 8,164 people applied. For cadets in 2003, 1,111 applied. In 2012, 2,477 applied, and in 2017, 3,447 applied. In 2016, 4,807. That's the trends of people that have applied for general service recruitment over the years. You spoke there about naval service recruitment. Is it naval service recruitment you spoke about?
Patrol day numbers, yeah, naval service.
I give the patrol days numbers. I've given them.
The actual people, the personnel.
Sorry?
The number, the personnel, is there more leaving than they're being recruited?
Well, look, we have our. I have on numerous occasions, Deputy. I have absolutely stated publicly to you in the Dáil a number of weeks ago. Yes, we have challenges, and we're going through the process of the Public Service Pay Commission. We have the adjudications that are happening. If it was in my own remit to fix pay, sure, I've had it fixed long ago. But it's not within my responsibility. It's not within. I won't say my responsibility. It's not within my remit. That is to do with public expenditure reform. We have absolutely highlighted all of our challenges within the Naval Service, the Air Corps and the Army over the last, with all the submissions that we have made to the Public Service Pay Commission. And I'm hoping of that outcome to be positive when it does happen.
Just one question regarding Q1 2019. How do you know it's Q1 2019 if they're meeting on October 23rd?
Sorry?
How do you know the decision is Q1 2019 if the...
Well, I don't know, but I'm expecting that's when it will be. Like the Pay Commission they've said they will require a number of months to do their work. So if they need a number of months to do their work, they got in September. They're meeting. They're doing the health area at the moment. There's interface with. No, they haven't fully reported on the health area. They're doing interface with Defence Forces at the moment. I want to give them the time and the space to do their work, to go through the process, and I expect it to be quarter one of 2019 before we have that back. If it was back earlier, absolutely great.
And just on the issue of the safety issues and in terms of the retention policy of pilots, have you received military advice regarding concerns with the air ambulance? And regarding
air ambulance, no, I haven't. I've received a number of reviews and recommendations, and my department and myself and the senior military manager working on those at the moment.
And just in some of your parliamentary question responses, there's a term used continuously that things are under ongoing review. Can you tell me what that means? There's a lot of policies in your department that seem to be under ongoing review all the time, forever and for more. What does that actually mean?
Maybe give me a couple of examples.
Well, for example, on the white paper.
Well, sure, yeah, but
what does
the white
that mean?
paper is... Well,
how can something be ongoing review? When is it going to be implemented? Can you...
Well, sure, we're coming to the committee. I would call that an ongoing review.
But it's
right?
been ongoing. There's lots of... There's other... Everything is... There's a review and a review and a review.
No,
what about policy implementation? I asked you about what tangible products are concluded from the white paper, and you couldn't give an answer. You said they would come to the committee.
Well, like, you know, there's 80 projects involved in where there's the DF military management and DF team and civil team looking after all the projects within the white paper. Of course, there's ongoing review of all the projects that are happening. But maybe give me other examples. The white paper, I'm willing to come before the committee. I've written to the committee to come to talk about the review of the white paper. I stated the reasons why we will review the white paper. Of course, it's a moving organisation. But are there other examples where you said there's ongoing reviews? I think
psychometric testing. You mentioned there's a review of psychometric testing.
I never. Of course, within the process of recruitment, you're not going to say, well, we're going to fix this and we're not going to change it for the next 5 years. Of course, you're going to be reviewing your practices and the processes. Of course, I'd be actually very critical of the organisation if they weren't doing that.
Deputy, was something indicated?
Yeah, there's a number of questions that I don't think I got an answer back in the first round. One was, and you might have thought it was a flippant comment, but it wasn't. What's the difference between a formal meeting of defence ministers and informal? And at an informal one, do you get to talk, or do your officials get to talk with the other ministers in relation to challenges? And I listed the challenges, but you don't have to answer specifically on the challenges. But is it a formal meeting like this, or is there opportunity to discuss with other militaries who've gone through some of the challenges that's facing our defence forces, and I listed some of them, but the likes of that, how did you manage to do that? Because sometimes expertise shared or mistakes others have dealt with or overcome can help us. In relation to one of the questions that I asked was in relation to military mobility, and you might have answered it, but I didn't. The European Union Military Committee have prepared a military requirements document, and I was asking, are we going to see that prior to the discussion in November, or will we wait for that? Two other quite specific questions. One, and they emerged from publicity that came on the foot of the PD4 conference, and I know you were in attendance, and some of the newspapers carried stories based on testimony or people who spoke at it. One was in relation to bomb disposal expert teams going back on duty after a 24-hour shift. Can you confirm if that is the practice? Because it seems to be a change from what happened previously. It seems to be from outside, if you want, very dangerous that bomb disposal experts would be on a 24-hour shift anyway. Secondly, there was an article which is very concerning. It was in relation to the psychiatrist having left the job within the Defence Forces, having flagged up that they were leaving, and in particular, and we talked about this, the great job being done in the Mediterranean, but that in some cases what is seen in the Mediterranean or elsewhere on duty can have a severe effect on Defence Force personnel. So what's happening if the psychiatrists aren't there to make these assessments? Is there a temporary contract with the private sector or from the HSE or whatever just to plug that gap until somebody is employed full-time?
Thanks, Senator Craughwell, and we'll wrap up then.
Thank you. Minister, you quote recruitment figures there for 2017, almost 8,000, 2016, almost 5,000, and so on and so forth. I think we've got to get away from quoting the number who actually express an interest. I mean, clearly the Defence Forces have told you that the resilience is below 10%. I think it's 9% at the moment. And of those who apply, less than 50% of them actually go through the first stage, which is the psychometric testing. That's not your fault. Don't get me wrong, that's not your fault. But I think we've got to be more honest about, because it is the problem that you have openly acknowledged today, and that is that you're seriously worried about the problems that exist in all three forces. But we've got to be honest about the number that are actually signing. Why are people applying for the Defence Forces, and then when they get the letter from the Defence Forces saying, right, sign on to this website for psychometric testing, they don't bother? Why is that happening? Are they trying to fool social welfare or something? Is that an issue we need to look at? And the other one I asked you in the last session about command and control. I told you some time ago of 3 near misses with .5 heavy machine guns where we could have had lost lives. Recently we had a barrel fall overboard or knocked overboard on a naval ship for a heavy machine gun again. Command and control, you cannot expect a second lieutenant coming out of the Curragh to take responsibility for 3 or 4 platoons. I've met soldiers who have said to me, if they get a bad recommendation from an officer who is in command, how can that officer give a bad recommendation when he might be there for 3 months or she might be there for 3 months and suddenly move somewhere else? Whatever happened to the point where a platoon had a platoon commander, a company had a company commander and 2 IC, a battalion had a battalion commander and 2 IC and an adjutant, and we all knew where we were in the organisation? What has happened to that? 5 officers currently out of 25 in Athlone, 3 captains in the 27 battalion and 1 lieutenant. Minister, this country is going to be sued at some stage for either an accident or somebody who is denied promotion or overseas service because they didn't get a favourable report. Again, Minister, maybe the military authorities aren't telling you the truth about where things are. The can-do ethos of soldiers is one that is is now working to their detriment, where any job they're given to do, they'll do it. But we're scraping the barrel. So are you being told the truth about command and control? That's my question.
Thanks, Senator Craughwell. Minister.
First of all, the formal is where it's a decision-making process, okay, and informal is a kind of a discussion, general discussion, and everything like that, which is, I find it's very important before you make the decision, because when you go to these meetings, you arrive the evening before, you're gone by maybe 2 or 3 o'clock the next day, where it's really important that you have an opportunity to have a kind of informal discussion around decisions you want to make at the formal meetings. Okay, do I discuss the challenges that we have with my counterparts? Of course, I have sidebar meetings at most of the formals and informals that would I have. And aside from that, I know that Mr Murphy to my left would be dealing with his counterparts in an ongoing basis about challenges that we have within our own organisations. The PD4 conference you spoke there about the 24th of June, that's all within the Working Time Directive, and there's a civil-military team working on that at the moment. The psychiatry services that you spoke about, we are in the process of recruiting new personnel for that, but there is an arrangement in place that we have a private contractor comes in, and with the HSE I understand as well. I outlined that in the recent PQ that I had in the Dáil, but we are in the process of recruiting a new person. Regarding Senator Craughwell, I've raised these issues with the Chief of Staff, if people raise immediate issues that have safety or whatever the story is, I've stated on all occasions that if there is problems or issues that we have, well, I'd like to know about them. But they have to come through the channels of through the Chief of Staff and through the DF organisation. Regarding the gaps in the organisation, we have brought forward the white paper projects, which is a gap analysis within the organisation, and there's a civil military team working on that at the moment, and that will where I want to find out where are the gaps within the organisation.
Did anybody mention it to you in that loan yesterday when you were there? The problem?
Well, let me say this to the Deputy, I'm not going to divulge any conversations I have in a private capacity with anybody.
Okay, I accept that.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Barrett.
Apologies for being delayed attending the meeting. Could I just say that given the times we're living in, and thankfully because of the current state of the economy and the demands that are on everybody, it's only natural that the likes of the Defence Forces are going to suffer in terms of being able to recruit the necessary number and quality of people that you wish to have. I mean, that is a fact. And, you know, the fact that X number apply and B number turn up for interview is part and parcel of... Sorry, would you mind staying quiet there? Just let me make my point. That B only turned up for interview. That's a serious situation, but it's a reality because of the current position of our economy. There are other options for people. And I think it's time that we had a review as to what exactly we're going to ask the Defence Forces to do in terms of priorities, as long as this situation pertains. I mean, the reality is there are so many options now for people that, you know, those who would have joined the Defence Forces in hard times because of lack of job opportunities are no longer available. And that's why you have a large number of applying, but a smaller number following on and attending for interview. That's the reality. It's the reality that of the times we live in. But I think in trying to spread our wings too far, and I know this is going to be a bit of a heresy when I say this, we have to review our commitments overseas given the current situation and specify what our priorities are in terms of our defence forces and the numbers that are available to us. Because you can't spread the butter that wide that you're not going to have the numbers required to spread it that far. And, you know, I'd ask the Minister, has he reviewed the situation? I mean, it's all very well taking on board overseas commitments. Now, I've been a Minister myself, and I know that it's part and parcel of the Defence Forces that they love doing overseas duties. But if we're short of personnel for the works here at home, we have to prioritise. And what I'm asking is, have we got sufficient numbers in the Defence Forces at the present time to spread our wings so widely? And should we be reviewing the exact roles that we should be participating in?
Thanks, Dr. Barrett. Also referred to the role of the Reserve Defence Forces. I don't think that was mentioned today, and I know it's an area that's never given the attention it should be given in society in general. The Reserve Defence Force over the years have been an important organisation in many times been the progression to people going on to serve in the Permanent Defence Forces, and also it was very important from the point of view of ensuring that young people who may have been vulnerable in the past to paramilitary organisation that they got involved in the structure of the then FCA or the Reserve Defence Forces, and that people who have gone on to contribute handsomely to society. And I think its role is important. I know back some time ago there were concerns in relation to the numbers enrolling in the Reserve Defence Forces, and some recruitment campaigns were undertaken. I sincerely hope that those campaigns will be continued and that they will be successful. We need the Reserve Defence Force as strong as is possible throughout the country. It does very valuable work, often unsung and unnoticed work, and it has been particularly important in giving many young people the opportunity to gain skills and to gain training and go on to worthwhile careers, be it within the Permanent Defence Forces or elsewhere. And I know, being a representative of two border counties and seeing the thuggery, the violence, the criminality, the paramilitary activity that went on in our region over many decades, I think that the role of people who served in the Reserve Defence Forces was never given the credit that they deserved. And one other thing, Minister, mention was made in regard to the huge pressures, and that has been basically the message here today, is we all want to see better pay and conditions for our Permanent Defence Force members. And I'm very conscious, again, of the people who were transferred from, say, the like of Dooney in Cavan to Athlone and then on to Dublin, to barracks, be it Cahilbrew or whatever. Those people have additional costs in regard to travel to work, and many instances there may not be a second car in a home, and it poses particular difficulty where maybe a partner or a wife in most instances would be at home with children that have to be brought to school, to Gaelic games, to participate in other activities as well. And the fact that the serving member of the Defence Forces has to travel and be away from home for some time causes that extra pressure on household income as well. So I would like, Minister, if the additional costs that have been incurred by people who had to transfer due to barrack closures, that could be taken into account in determining future pay and conditions and remuneration. Thank you, Minister.
Just on, I'll start off with Deputy Barrett first. Absolutely, you're a former member, or former, I was going to say former member of the Defence Forces. Sorry, I'm here for over 2 hours now, so you're a former minister. You fully understand when you're competing with a booming economy, one of the areas that are most safe within the public sector is the Defence Forces, and that has always been, if you go back over and look at trends, that has always been the way. Of course we have to prioritise of what we can and cannot do, but the most important thing, Deputy, is that we do it in a very safe environment, in a very safe way, and that is my priority. And I've absolutely stated that on numerous occasions. I'll give you an example. We're sending a full battalion over to UNIFIL in Lebanon in November of this year. We can do that for 12 months, and we cannot do it beyond that. I've spoken to the Under Secretary of the UN, stated that, and absolutely it's great for young people. Young people join the Defence Forces. Look, you've had the opportunity to meet them on the front line on numerous occasions. And if you say, why did you join the Defence Forces? One of the things is we want to get overseas. And like, you know, we're giving these people, young people, the opportunity. Over 100 people will go to Lebanon or overseas duty to Lebanon this time for the first time ever. They've never been overseas, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It's great. Met them on Monday night in the Glen of Mal in Wicklow for their night shoot. But we have the trends that you spoke about there, the number of people who actually apply to the number of people who actually go through the full process. We've highlighted that to the Pay Commission. The Pay Commission look for those trends, look for that data. Part of all of that has been submitted to the Pay Commission. The Chairman, and has answer that. Chairman, regarding your question and the reserve, absolutely, the reserve form a very important part of the Defence Force. The current strength of the Army, the Naval Service Reserve is 1,745 effective personnel. The Army Reserve is 1,650, the Naval Reserve 125. Recruitment in 2018, the Defence Forces are actively locally recruiting for the Reserve Defence Forces. To date, 2018 there have been 1,363 applications to join the RDF, 1,153 for the Army Reserve applications, 170 which are females. In 210 Naval Service Reserve, 31 who are female, and 124 members have been inducted into the RDF to date in 2018. I think it's highlighted right through the white paper on defence the importance of the RDF, and the first line reserve at the moment is as of the 31st of August in 2018 is 272. You also, the Chief of Staff appointed at Colonel rank a member to look after the reserves. It was Brian Cleary. He has moved on now. There's another person has been appointed to that position, and that is in communication, daily communication, working with all the reserve units right across the country, encouraging recruitment and everything like that, making sure they're active, and if they have any issues or problems or anything like that. This is a new appointment only in the last 7 or 8 months. You spoke there about people that were relocated from different barracks following the reorg in 2012. A lot of this stuff was submitted to the Pay Commission, and I know with the interface that my department and senior military management will have with the Pay Commission, they will raise all the stuff, the issue that you raised about people having to travel, let it be from, if they're based in Dublin or in the Cork, Kildare, or if they're based in Galway and having to travel long distances. I will absolutely assure you, Deputy, that all of those issues will be raised at the interface with the Pay Commission.
Thanks, Minister. I want to thank you, Minister, for the detailed outline of the contributions and Deputy Wallace, did you want to speak?
No, thanks. No,
the next one. Yeah.
There's a good few things I could take up with Joe, but I mean, he wouldn't actually like it, he wouldn't. And I wouldn't like to be upsetting him.
Oh, well, sure, you can meet on home territory for a weekend or whatever. Minister Crowe, I want to thank you for the detailed report you gave us on the issues that are raised at the informal Defence Council meetings and at the formal ones as well, and to thank you for your exchange with the members. And of course, the issues are of concern to the committee, and we look forward to ongoing dialogue with you on all of these issues of concern to us and of concern to the permanent Defence Forces as well. Actually, it was mentioned earlier, the Chief of Staff has agreed to come before this committee. That date hasn't been fixed, but it's during this particular Dáil term. He had agreed to come in July, and we had to postpone that meeting because he had a commitment abroad that the timeline would make it difficult for him to make an appearance. So that meeting will be held before Christmas anyway. That concludes the public session, and we now need to go into private session. I could also say to members, we have an informal meeting after the conclusion of the private session as well. So thanks, Minister, and your officials.